Here's a billion-dollar question for you. Should we as business people strive for excellence or should we strive for growth? Because oftentimes it feels like these two goals are completely opposing. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the excellent versus growth debate and how to work towards a balance between delivering a beautiful, high-quality service or product while also achieving crazy stretch goals. We'll chat with Carmen and Zita about brands that achieved balance and long-term growth through quality versus those that tried to grow a little too quickly.
And it's so tricky because we're living in such a time where everything is fast, right? Where everyone's just like growth, capitalism, money, etc. But what starts to happen in some companies is that they grow so fast, they either cannot sustain the growth because they just hired too many people, they weren't set up for it, or like the quality gets sacrificed because they're more concerned with the money coming in versus what they're putting out.
But first, let's talk about one of the best departments for recognizing and combating the dangers of mismanaged business growth, customer experience. To set the stage for why my CX friends are more important than ever, let's look at some of the current events going on. Recently, there have been more and more headlines around post-pandemic growth cooling down. And it seems like the people who buy from and work at these pandemic darlings are the ones who are most impacted.
Streaming giant Netflix suffered its biggest stock loss in nearly 2 decades, losing more than $50 billion in market value. Today's losses come after Netflix announced its first loss of subscribers in more than 10 years. And now the company is considering some major changes.
Good evening and welcome to 12 News at 6. Our big story tonight, a major shakeup at Tempe-based Carvana. The company announcing it is laying off 2,500 employees.
And looking specifically at layoffs, Fast Company reported that Doma, Cameo, Robinhood, and Zoom all fired a good chunk of people this month. Seth Godin got me thinking about how maybe all of this madness could be a side effect of rapid growth that happens without the right CX teams and plans put into place. Here's a clip from Seth's podcast and what he had to say about it.
And the purpose of my rant today is to talk about an interesting side effect, possible side effect, occasional side effect of the world we live in, of the culture of capitalism and industrialism. And that side effect, unlike the decimation of whales, is something that we look forward to. And that side effect is, did we create something of beauty? Did we treat other people with dignity and respect? Did we build something that was both resilient and at the heart of what we think about when we try to do good work?
When it comes to ensuring that your fast-growing company is still doing good work and impacting others in a good way, CX teams are at the forefront of it. Here at PandaDoc, we've seen a ton of growth in both our employee headcount, funding, and customer numbers. So what does it take for a tech unicorn company like us to avoid becoming the next Theranos or Quibi? Well, for the sake of brevity, I've tried to boil it down to 2 themes. 1, our global team structure and training, and 2, using our tech stack effectively for tracking company health. Let's start with the global team structure and training. If you're wondering how to build out a solid CX department at your org, maybe you can use ours as an example. First, our CX department is organized into the following teams: customer support, who monitors our customer queries via email and chat; customer success, who focuses on assisting specific accounts; and service delivery, who does onboarding, technical solutions, and engineering. We've also got CS ops and leadership kind of sprinkled throughout to make sure everything runs really smoothly. Next to consider is how you want to offer support. If you want to deliver 24/7 live chat support, you can do what we do and employ full-time customer support teams across the world. We've got hubs in Western and Eastern Europe, the US, and the Philippines. This ensures coverage in pretty much all of the major time zones. This is a smart way to expand and localize your products around the globe, and it could also differentiate you from your competitors who might only be offering email support, which isn't always helpful. Next is our training and enablement at PandaDoc. If it's possible, consider creating a learning services team or a role to manage all of the training and enablement that your CX team needs specifically. Our team here uses a tool called SkillJar to host all sorts of useful content like monthly all-hands recorded meetings, product updates, and training sessions that are self-paced courses on things like feature demos, new tools, and what's coming down the pipeline. It's way better than dumping everything into a Google Drive folder, especially if you want to track and monitor completion of these trainings. All right, the last theme of a successful CX team for you to learn about is making sure you can carefully track and monitor data. But doing that takes the right tech stack. Here are some of the tools I saw referenced by our team. Zendesk for our ticketing system, Recurly for our subscription management, User Voice for our customer feedback, Amplitude for tracking PandaDoc user behavior, Salesforce for Salesforce things, Django for accessing and troubleshooting client accounts, and Drift for chatbot stuff. There are plenty more I'm not mentioning here, but those are the big ones, and it's all about how well you use them. Make sure the accuracy and transparency on this data is actually valuable for understanding how your company is doing health-wise. For example, I listened in on a recent all hands our CX team had and saw tons of information on metrics like our CSAT, response rates, DSAT. Beyond that, we were also reporting on detailed onboarding metrics like graduate health score, also expansion ops, services sold, and solution architects were focused on churn and how many cases were created by our team and elevated to receive technical assistance. My best advice to securing quality as your org scales to invest in the people first, then the tools, then your process. My final tip on the topic is this: if you're ready, track, analyze, and share these alarm bell business metrics, which to me are churn, expansion, reactivation, contraction, renewals, and CSAT. Basically, anything I mentioned today was going to be helpful for you and your team. And you can do all of this using Tableau, which is what we do for all of our reporting to feed into one single source of truth. All right, take a deep breath. If your head is hurting from all of this CX talk, rest assured you're not alone. After the break, we'll wrap up our episode with Carmen Zita, who calls in to share her branding tips on brands who have hit the sweet spot for growth and beauty in their products and services. Okay, welcome back from the break. We're here to wrap up this episode with my favorite segment with Carmen Zita. Carmen, welcome to the show.
Hey, Travis.
We are talking about quality versus growth. And to kick off the conversation, I want to ask you a question, which is, are you hungry? Because today we're going to be talking about power hungry. We're going to be talking about grocery stores, I think, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But for the growth hungry business people out there who might be listening, what are the risks for a brand that scales too fast?
So this is a loaded question, but an example comes to mind. So real quickly, this topic that we're bringing up today, I'm sure is going to be relevant to a lot of people that are working at specifically startups that are trying to grow and expand and maybe hit IPO, et cetera. And it's so tricky because we're living in such a time where everything is fast, right? Where everyone's just like growth, capitalism, money, et cetera. But what starts to happen in some companies is that they grow so fast, they either cannot sustain the growth because they just hired too many people, they weren't set up for it, or like the quality gets sacrificed because they're more concerned with the money coming in versus what they're putting out. And so that leads me to one of my examples when you bring up like companies that grew rapidly and it was to their demise, is a company called Von Dutch. And this is a throwback, by the way, for anyone that grew up as a teenager or a young adult in the early 2000s. If you look up the Von Dutch trucker hat, which I associate with Ashton Kutcher and Paris Hilton for the rest of my life, that clothing brand does not exist today. And there's a documentary about it that gets into the whole deep, dirty dive as to why, but I'll give you the high level example, right? So the company was founded by a group of guys in California, kind of rough street guys. Their names escape me at the moment, but it was basically about like American hot rod culture. So if you look at the aesthetic, there was a lot of like, like flames and this like very cool lettering. It became this like really cool California underground thing that people would wear, right? So
Gotcha.
Then eventually, as the new partners came in, the company got bigger and the company wanted to be aggressive about their growth. The designer that was working on Von Dutch that they brought in to help with expansion started to basically turn this brand into like a thing that all the celebrities wanted to wear. Like I said, at the time, 2000s, Paris Hilton, Ashton Kutcher, like Tommy Lee, they were all wearing Von Dutch for like a hot minute. It was the coolest thing you could wear. And then all of a sudden they're like, oh, cool, sales are up. Let's create like a line for kids. Let's create like bedazzled pants. Let's start just throwing spaghetti to the wall because everyone thinks it's cool. So they'll buy it just because it says Von Dutch. Well, it got so saturated and eventually it went from cool to kitschy and corny hella fast. And as a result, the company eventually went bankrupt. And it does not exist today. So if you're listening and you're like, what the hell is Von Dutch? Well, that's why. But if you Google it, you're going to have some like legit PTSD about those trucker hats, like I did when I watched the documentary. There's a slew of other things that happened to this company, but that is definitely what drove them from like hot to not, and basically cost a lot of people their jobs and a lot of money and time.
So understanding the like worst case scenarios, and I feel like they turn into like really popular documentaries. I'm thinking of like the We Worked documentary, you know,
Yep.
The Theranos documentary, where power hungry folks grew too fast and didn't really stick around for too long. But if a company that's listened to this is familiar with this, what are steps they can take to avoid scaling too quickly for their own good?
Yeah, I think that when you come from like a startup mentality and you're used to operating a certain way, you don't realize that when you go from like 100 to 1,000, the way you have to work to maintain the same value and quality needs to adapt to that growth, right? Your company is not going to work the same as it did when it was 100 to when it's 1,000. Absolutely not. So you have to operationally be set up, have systems in place, have like a clear hiring plan. Because if you just hire a bunch of people and haven't figured out how this is going to work, you're basically building the plane while it's in the air. So that's one thing. And also, I think it's important that's a major thing. And I think it's important to understand when you're scaling that quickly and so many new people become part of the company, and on the leadership and the executive side, if everyone isn't aligned with the core values and the core differentiators and the reason why this started to begin with, that's how things start to kind of go off the rails, right? That's how these big companies expand to the point where maybe you're not even sure, you know, what the value prop is anymore, right? Because it's just gotten into so many hands that it's just changed. And then it could end up causing you to be unsuccessful. Okay,
so the Von Dutch example, wonderful. And it's definitely giving me like a little bit of, you know, flashbacks to my middle school fashion that I saw in the, you know, hallways of Miami Palmetto Middle School.
Yeah.
But do you have an example of a company that has, in your eyes, you know, successfully maintained quality while also scaling rapidly?
So I wouldn't say that they scaled rapidly in the example that, you know, I wanted to talk about, but I will say that they've scaled to be, you know, nationwide and still maintain their quality despite being large. So Trader Joe's is a great example of a company that maybe people don't realize has been around since the 1960s. So it started out as like a local chain on the West Coast. You know, over several decades, it stayed on the West Coast until it got into the hands of another owner. I think it was John Shields in the 80s who acquired the company or became the CEO, I think. And he's the one that made it a nationwide chain. But the way they started when they decided to expand was, okay, how do we take this chain out of California into other parts of the United States, which I think the first place they went out of California was New York, right? So talk about going all the way to the East Coast and a vibe so different from the West Coast. How do we maintain how it feels to shop at Trader Joe's, the values, etc.? They went as far as to transplant staff from their West Coast chains into the one that they opened on the East Coast to maintain that quality. That tells you something, because they didn't just say, okay, we're going to open a location in New York, We're going to hire a bunch of New Yorkers and we're going to see how it rolls. They wanted you to maintain that feeling. And today, you know, even though it's nationwide, you still don't have the same amount of Trader Joe's as like a regular grocer, right? Like if you think of Publix or Kroger's, those, I mean, I have a Publix like 5 in a 1 mile radius. I think in Miami, there's like 2, maybe 3 Trader Joe's. So they still are large, but they've remained scarce enough that it's still special to go to, right? And they created something that was also, I think, scalable to maintain that way. They're not the size of a regular grocery store. They don't carry as many products as the average grocery store. And they've just had this like steady, maintained, you know, success. And again, you haven't gotten to a point with Trader Joe's where you could sit there and say, oh, the quality sucks now that they've expanded to all these different places. They took their time. Like I said, in the 80s is when they started expanding out of California. Now in the 2000s is when like Trader Joe's is the hot, hip, cool place to go for like their tzatziki dip or whatever. Like it took time. They didn't do it in a year or 10 years. So I think that's a great example because again, success and growth, it really is subjective. I know companies that have been around for 10, 20, 30 years that have purposefully remained small because they could remain in control of the quality of the work they're producing or the product, et cetera. So it's all a matter of, you know, what's your plan and how do you define success and making sure you set yourself up right.
Yeah, great point, great example. I think we lose sight of this, and especially like in, you know, fast-paced SaaS world and, you know, software as a service and B2B and stuff. And we have a habit of having a growth mindset that maybe gets a little too growth hungry, right? Or not every company needs to strive to be, you know, the next Amazon, and you don't need to take over the world with your growth. Yeah, I love the Trader Joe's example. I think it ties in nicely to, you know, showing that if you stick with your core values, you stick with your you know, foundational differentiation of why you started your business, that can take you a really a far way. And I think longevity is the name of the game and a success metric that maybe more founders and leaders need to consider, right? Of just like, we're not in this to just IPO after 10 years. You know, we're here for, you know, to build a world-class product and culture, hopefully for hundreds of years, right? Like maybe that's the growth goal, or that's the definition of success that folks can look at. So great example. Yeah. Now that we've understood, you know, the Von Dutch and the Trader Joe's, the two ends of the spectrum there, what are some steps you think companies can take to avoid scaling too quickly for their own good? Here at PandaDoc, you have come in the last year plus and helped implement a lot of changes as we've grown, and you help manage the operations for our brand and design team. And I think a couple of things off the top of my head that I've seen you've helped contribute to. We work out of a a project management tool now, right? We all know that we have a certain way to submit requests, whether or not everybody follows that. You know, there's always going to be new people coming into the org. Got to learn the hard way. They got to deal with Carmen at some point. But no, in all seriousness, I think you've done a good job.
You made that sound horrible.
when people, you know, when people hear like, oh, you need to, you know, set up your operations to scale, it sounds fluffy. So do you mind sharing with us maybe a couple of things that went into like the decisions you and the team have made and how we as a brand team have scaled?
Yes. I'm going to try to answer this as succinctly as humanly possible because it's operations stuff that no one actually wants to hear, but it's important, right? So
I disagree. Like you said, I think a lot of people do want to hear it.
Thank you.
But go ahead.
Thank you. Usually when I talk about it in settings of like meetings and stuff, like no one wants to hear it. But so, you know, one of the things like you said, and I came into it, but I help, you know, with the adoption of it and the streamlining of how we do things. But we do have a project management system. We use money.com to, you know, facilitate the work that we do because we have grown to have multiple stakeholders, right? Like you said, I work with the creative and development teams, and we're a shared service for the PandaDoc organization, which means now at, however many people we are today, almost 1,000, I think it is, we have people from all departments coming and asking us for things. And we had to develop a system of, okay, well, this is we need to create briefs or intake forms. We had to create a structure of like how we work and how we deliver, meaning, we work in a sprint format. We also had to figure out like a prioritization metric. Like, it's funny because you'll get people from different departments and everything is high priority when it's something that you need. But, you also have to assess and look at it against the other things that you've been asked for from other teams and how does it impact the business and look at things strategically. You get to a point where you can't just do everything that's being asked of you. You have to take a step back and you have to have strategic conversations about like, okay, this is what we want. But A, is this something we even should do? Or B, when is the right time to do it? Or when do we do it against all the other things that we are doing? So having an understanding of how you should prioritize, what are those things that make it high, medium, and low is super important, which people underestimate. And it's hard too in a startup that's growing because people that maybe have been with the company for a long time that are used to quick turnarounds. And by quick turnarounds, I'm talking like, a day or two, in a much larger organization where we're talking about, creative and development, we have to think in like, weeks to develop certain things. And if it's a big enough project, it could be something that takes months, right? And that's not about, some people might interpret that as like, oh, well, the lead times are longer. It's like, well, there's more volume. We have to be smart about what we're doing. And also people love to speed up creativity, which is really frustrating. A lot of people think they are designers or a lot of people think they are developers and they don't understand the nature of it. It is difficult, right? It's difficult for creatives to come up with amazing visuals like week over week over week over week. It's hard to be a developer. It's literally a trial and error job where they have to code something and they test it and it breaks and then they fix it. So, systemizing how we do that work is, part of, what I do to try to make us successful as we grow. And it is tricky and it's challenging but I enjoy it. I'll end it with saying, but I enjoy it.
I think one of the also
for people that own this company that are listening.
I think one of the things that I really like that you and the team do as well is you do a good job of tracking all of the projects and the time that went into them, and then sharing in a visual way. In our marketing all hands, we usually have a slide. Right, we do a monthly all hands marketing team meeting, and we have a slide that shows all of the design projects or development projects that were created, and it's massive. It's like you're like, whoa, look at all those different designs. So being able to, like you said, put a system in place where you can prioritize what are we working on. For us on our intake form, one of the questions that you've put in there that people have to fill out, yes or no, is this an OKR? Right? And then that helps people realize like, hey, this is going to be deprioritized in comparison to things that are OKRs. And for people that are not in SaaS and are like, what's an OKR? I'm trying to remember exactly what it stands. Objective and key result.
Objectives and key results. Yeah.
It's just basically like your predetermined goals for the month or quarter that you and the team have all, signed off on, or the company has signed off on. So.
Yeah. And another big thing that we're getting better at, and again, it's a symptom of growth, is planning, right? The more people you have involved in a company or a project, the more you really have to plan for things, not just when we're talking about resources, but making sure that we're not all kind of doing a bunch of siloed, let's say, campaigns, and they're not all working together, right? Like everybody kind of needs to share their plan and their roadmap to make sure that there's like cohesion and consistency and we're all working toward the same thing. It's easy to lose sight of that the bigger you are. When you're a company of 10 people, but what everybody's doing, what everyone's focus is. But once you've grown to the scale where we are and beyond, and there's so many different departments and different leadership and different goals, having that alignment when there's a planning session is super important to make sure that everybody's running in the same direction.
I love it. And I did think you did a nice job of keeping it succinct, and I didn't find it boring. So thank you, Carmen.
Thank you, Travis.
Final takeaways that folks can walk away from this conversation and bring back to their teams and hold on to. Don't wear trucker hats and
Ever.
Shop at Trader Joe's. No, in all seriousness, what are some of your key takeaways from our conversation today?
So first of all, if you are looking to grow, really think about what that means from a people count, right? Because when you are expanding and you are creating new positions, always keep in mind that when you grow, if there is a failure on the horizon, that failure is going to impact the people. So, if you're like, oh, we're going to hire 1,000 people tomorrow, and then you don't reach your goals, and then a couple months later, you have to fire those same 1,000 people. Those are people that depended on you. Those are people that had faith in you. So do the best you can to set them up for success. Create systems, because as you are growing and as you are trying to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success, before those new hires come, that work that you have for expansion is going to fall on your existing team. So if you're not setting us up for success, you're going to burn out your existing team before your new team even gets there. And that just creates resentment, and that's not fun. And also sticking to, quality. Just because you're big doesn't mean you have to sacrifice on quality. You just have to make sure that everyone in the organization, on the executive team and the leadership teams, are on the same page and are as passionate about maintaining the core of why you all are, started this thing to begin with.
I love it. Stick to your core differentiator. Don't lose sight of what makes you valuable in the first place. And building systems that can scale so that your people don't get crushed under the weight of it. All good stuff, Carmen. I'm going to head over to Trader Joe's and get some of that, what is it called? Buttercream ice cream?
Oh, yeah.
Cookie butter ice cream?
Do it.
Thanks for inspiring me.
You're welcome.
And I'll have to dust off my Ashton Kutcher hat for us later, but appreciate it.
Please don't. Please just burn it. Just burn it.
All right, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Customer Engagement Lab this week. We hope you enjoyed it, and stick around. We'll have another episode for you coming soon.
Thanks for listening to the Customer Engagement Lab, brought to you by PandaDoc. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our YouTube channel or connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear from you and what you think of the show.